to the U.S. House of Representatives, the floor, which is getting underway in just a moment. We'll see morning hour starting here at 10 o'clock, and then at 12 noon, legislative business with 1-minute speeches. We go now to the House floor.
The House will be in order. The Chair lays before the House communication from the Speaker.
The Speaker's Rooms, Washington, D.C., August 1st, 2012. I hereby appoint the Honorable Daniel Webster to act as Speaker Pro Tempore on this day. Signed, John A. Boehner, Speaker of the House of Representatives.
Gentleman lays before the House communication.
The Honorable, the Speaker, House of Representatives, sir. I hereby resign from the office of the United States Representative for the 4th District of Kentucky, effective at close of business on July 31st, 2012. Enclosed is the letter I have submitted to the Governor Steve Brescher. I thank the people of Kentucky's 4th District for the honor of serving their congressman over the last 8 years. When I was a cadet at West Point, I internalized the words of the U.S. Military Academy's motto, duty, honor, country. Next, I learned that success was based on honoring God, family, and work in that order. In December 2011, I decided that in order to honor those values, I needed to retire from congressional service so I could more effectively serve my family as a husband and father. Those priorities continue to guide my decisions. Recently, a family health issue has developed that will demand significantly more time of my time to assist. As a result, I cannot continue to effectively fulfill my obligations to both my office and my family. Family must and will come first. I have served with great men and women in Congress in both parties and leave knowing that the House is filled with people who love this country and are working to make our future better. I am grateful to have been blessed by being a part of this great institution. Signed sincerely, Jeff Davis, Member of Congress.
Under Clause 5, Paren D of Rule 20, the Chair announces to the House that, in light of the resignation of the gentleman from Kentucky, Mr. Davis, the whole number of the House is 431. Pursuant to the order of the House on January 17, 2012, the Chair will now recognize members from lists submitted by the majority and minority leaders for the morning hour debate. The Chair will alternate recognition between the parties, with each party limited to 1 hour and each member other than the majority leader, the minority leader, and the minority whip limited to 5 minutes each. But in no event shall the debate go beyond 11:50 a.m. The Chair recognizes the gentleman from Oregon, Mr. Blumenauer, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The House of Representatives is a unique and special place. There are many political offices in America where one can get office via accident or appointment, but every man and woman on this floor had to be elected by friends and neighbors to deal with the fiscal and economic health of the nation, for giving voice to people's fears, aspirations, and dreams. I count every day of service in Congress as a gift. Our friend and colleague Steve LaTourrette's announcement that he would not seek re-election should give pause to every one of us. You often hear a person say they don't always agree with somebody, but they respect them. With Steve LaTourrette, that's true. Despite being in different political parties, I deeply respect and appreciate Steve's forthright opinions. His focus on having the resources to rebuild and renew America is as refreshing as it is important. He's willing to call for increases in fees and taxes for infrastructure. At the same time, he pushes for responsible budget cutting and right-sizing government in a way that's going to pinch almost everyone. His approach is courageous and consistent, and ultimately we will follow that balanced path. He has a sense of justice and regular order, as when he took to the floor as a lonely voice arguing for due process on behalf of a disgraced former member. He does what he believes in. Another overused phrase in this body is a wake-up call. But Steve's decision and announcement should be a wake-up call. A wake-up call to the majority party to think about what this portends for their ability to govern and what will happen when the political winds shift just a little, which they surely will. It's a wake-up call for the people on my side of the aisle. As we fight against what we think are short-sighted and destructive policies, we need to do so in a way that is fair. We all should look for opportunities to make a little progress on second- and third-tier issues that will help do some good while we build the capacity of this institution in bipartisan problem-solving. Most of all, this should be a wake-up call to the American public. Too many of us have allowed our political decisions to be outsourced, as the political process increasingly is taken over by smaller and smaller groups of extreme opinion in primaries of both parties. The Tea Party activists have gotten headlines this weekend in the Texas Senate primary, but the dynamic is known by both parties and potentially distorts the choices of candidates and of issues in the fall. Some members of Congress gain a little notoriety by virtue of vision or policy. Usually we get it by being outrageous and stark. Perhaps we're known at home and for groups that have interests that we work with. But the vast majority of us wouldn't register above margin of error on the larger stage of American national politics. Steve, despite 2 decades of solid, distinguished service, his wit, good humor, and effectiveness, is a number of us who may be characterized as an obscure member of Congress. Yet, I would argue, Steve LaTourette should be on the radar screen of every American. His is a powerful message of an institution that needs serious readjustment. Steve, his family, especially the younger children, will do just fine. I think he'll have a better job, spend more time with family and friends. I think he'll live longer. But make no mistake, everybody should pay attention to his story, his career, and why he's leaving. In a lifetime of solid, productive public service, if this leads to people reconsidering how we do business, how the American public assesses who they reward or punish, then our loss due to his retirement may be the most important contribution in his distinguished career.
For what purpose the gentleman from Alabama rise?
Mr. Speaker, I rise to present a privileged report from the Committee on Ethics for filing under the rule.
The clerk will report the title.
In the matter of allegations relating to Representative Laura Richardson,
Referred to the House calendar and ordered printed. Chair will recognize the gentleman from Minnesota, Mr. Paulson, for 5 minutes. Without objection.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I rise to recognize Eden Prairie, Minnesota native and U.S. Olympian Rachel Bootsma. The 18-year-old swimmer competed on Sunday in the semifinals of the women's 100-meter backstroke. She has made her home community very proud with her incredible hard work and grace on such a grand stage. It is no small feat to have made it to her very first Olympics, and in the coming weeks, Rachel will take another important step when she leaves Minnesota for her freshman year at college, and also at that opportunity be able to swim for Olympic coach Terry McKeever. So I have a feeling, Mr. Speaker, this is not the last that we will see of this tenacious swimmer. I'd like to congratulate Rachel and all of the American athletes for carrying our banner in London. Go Team USA, and I yield back.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Gutierrez, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to expand and review my remarks.
No objection.
Mr. Speaker, I believe there is no greater cause for celebration in America than when we expand rights to more of our people. We are never truer to our American values than when we look at a group of people and demand that they be treated with dignity and respect. We are never more patriotic than when we protect and expand the rights of honest, hard-working people. When we live up to our original promise of liberty and equality and give meaning to those American words, we hold these truths to be self-evident. All men are created equal. Right now we have reasons to celebrate because shortly the Department of Homeland Security and the White House are scheduled to announce guidelines on the application process for DREAM-eligible immigrants to defer deportation and get work permits so they can take a vital step toward living freely and fully in our nation that has always been their only home. Today, I want to congratulate the DREAM Act eligible youth who have fought so hard for this right, the 1 million of them that will be taking a step forward. And I want to remind DREAM eligible youth that because of the intelligent action by President Obama on August 15th, they will be able to apply for work permits and protection from deportation. On August 15th, Mr. Speaker, they will take a step out of the shadows and into the light. I encourage them to take this step, and I want them to know that help and resources are available. But first, a warning. Any progress on immigration is soon followed by some unscrupulous attempts to make money off the backs of deserving immigrants. So I say to my friends today, be careful. There is no reason that applying for relief through President Obama's use of prosecutorial discretion should be expensive or cumbersome. If someone says the only way for a dreamer to apply is to write a big check, my advice to the dreamer is they should run in the other direction. They are being lied to. But dreamers should run toward help because help is on the way. In Chicago yesterday, the Illinois Coalition for Immigrant and Refugee Rights and I announced a workshop that will be held on August 15th. The very first day, the 1 million young people can apply for work permits and come out of the shadows and get deferred action from deportation. The event will be held at Navy Pier in Chicago. Mayor Emanuel, myself, and Senator Durbin, who has played such a leadership role on the DREAM Act for years, will be there. We will have all the resources anyone needs to apply that day. It will be free. We will answer questions, and we will provide the resources necessary to thousands of young people that we expect will attend. And we are not alone in Chicago. All across the country, plans are being made by immigrant advocates and organizations and elected officials for how to help DREAM Act eligible youth to apply for their work permits and a stay of deportation. Tomorrow, I will be joined by my colleagues to talk about resources available coast to coast. As one important step, I encourage people to visit this website. DreamRelief.org. That's DreamRelief.org. To find out more about who is eligible, how to apply, and where people can receive assistance, it's DreamRelief.org. On August 15th, across America, thousands of honest, hard-working, law-abiding, DREAM-eligible youth, immigrants, should be celebrating by lining up and taking that historic step toward equality. It's a day of long overdue fairness for our young people, and I don't want one eligible young person to miss this opportunity. I want our young dreamers to demonstrate to America on August 15th what they've demonstrated to their communities and their families and their friends their entire lives. They've worked hard and earned this right by excelling in school, by helping their neighborhoods, and by serving our nation. I know who you are. You are the next generation of leaders of our great nations. On August 15th, show all of America who you are. And we need your example, because it's vital to remember that every time we've expanded civil rights in America, every time someone tried to stand in the way. From women's suffrage to voting rights for African Americans, to Americans with disabilities, to marriage equality, someone will raise their voice against expanding the rights enjoyed by some Americans to all Americans. There is always someone who says, these rights, these liberties, this equality, it's for me, it's not for you. So I ask my dream-eligible friends, 1 million strong, on August 15th, show America who you are and remind America that freedom and equality is for all of us.
Chair recognizes the gentlelady from North Carolina, Ms. Fox, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my heart is heavy for the family and friends of Watauga County Sheriff's Deputy William Mass, Jr., who gave his life in the line of duty on July 26th. In his 23 short years, Deputy Mass made an imprint on the communities he served and called home. He was a graduate of Watauga High School and a member of Bible Way Baptist Church. He cherished the North Carolina way of life, hunting, fishing, off-roading, and riding horses in our beautiful country. The thoughts and prayers of thousands remain with his beloved wife, Paige, their unborn child, William, his parents, Angela Wall and William Mass, Sr., his extended family, and the entire Watauga County Sheriff's Office. May each be comforted and find peace in the midst of this tragedy. And may we be faithful to remember that the safety we experience in our communities is maintained in part because people like Deputy Mass volunteer to place themselves in harm's way for our protection. For that caliber of service and sacrifice, we are grateful. I yield back.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from West Virginia, Mr. Rahal, for 5 minutes. Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to urge legislative action on a widespread public health crisis. I want to thank, first of all, my colleagues, especially my good neighbor and chairman of the House Appropriations Committee, gentleman from Kentucky, Mr. Hal Rogers, Congresswoman Mary Bono Mack, Congressman Steve Lynch, and Bill Keating, whom you'll hear from in a moment, all tremendous leaders in our fight to stop this epidemic. The CDC has confirmed what local leaders and professionals across the board have been struggling with daily. Prescription drug abuse is a national epidemic, a term the CDC does not use lightly. It is no longer a silent epidemic. It can be seen at any hour of any day on street corners and in schoolyards. Every day there are news stories reporting overdoses, deaths, accidents, and tragedies of families torn apart by the vicious cycle of prescription drug abuse. And the cycle is certainly vicious. Unlike cocaine or heroin, prescription drugs are legal and frequently prescribed by caring physicians who are led by the principal oath of first do no harm. Yet alarming statistics show that children and adults are blind to the harmful consequences of these drugs, even as they become addicted, paying upwards of $150 per pill to buy them on the black market. Distressingly, my home state of West Virginia has our nation's highest rate of drug-related deaths. In fact, between 0-1 and 0-8, more than 9 out of 10 of those deaths involve prescription drugs. Incredibly, drug overdoses now kill more West Virginians each year than do car accidents. But the alarming use and deaths by prescription drugs is not just in West Virginia. As other distinguished members will tell you, prescription drug abuse hits everyone, whether you are 9 or 90, whether you're rich or poor, living in big cities or small towns, whether you're Democrat, Independent, Republican, or whatever, anywhere in our great United States. We know there's no one single answer, no single action, or no silver bullet in the fight against prescription drug abuse. I've met many times with law enforcement, community organizations, educators, physicians, and many other constituents, and I know that fighting back against prescription drug abuse will take the work of an entire village. We must strengthen drug diversion, educate children and adults on prevention, work with the medical community on addiction and pain treatment, and treat and rehabilitate those affected by vicious addiction before they succumb to the death spiral. I and my distinguished colleagues have put forth and supported legislation that aims to combat prescription drug abuse. We know that something more must be done from a federal level, and that's why I've introduced H.R. 1925, the Prescription Drug Abuse Prevention and Treatment Act. This bill would implement multiple measures essential to combating prescription drug abuse: education and training, monitoring, evaluation, and enforcement. And it provides a good guideline to coordinate federal, state, and local efforts to fight this epidemic. The bill establishes mandatory physician and consumer education and authorizes federal funding to help our states create and maintain prescription drug monitoring programs that all states can access. It would also set up a uniform system for tracking painkiller-related deaths, helping states and law enforcement professionals manage and report data. The West Virginia State Police, our state's Attorney General, and even physicians have all consistently stressed the need for access to a prescription drug monitoring system that is shared between state lines and updated in real time. I know my colleagues have authored and supported similar bills like H.R. 2119, the Ryan Creedon Act, which also seeks to implement targeted physician education on prescription drug abuse and addiction, and H.R. 1065, the Pill Mill Crackdown Act, which would help further eradicate pill mills throughout our nation. These bills address critical issues that ought to be part of this Congress' effort to craft legislation to assist our states and communities in combating prescription drug abuse. The toll of destruction and devastation heaped upon America's families and our economy by this epidemic demands that U.S. Congress must act and act swiftly. So I urge my colleagues to move forward and bring legislation to the fore that will enable our communities to fight back against prescription drug abuse. Let us act with dispatch and compassion and with an acute understanding of the enormity of the challenge before us. The future of our families and children and the entire health and well-being of local communities in our nation depend on us. I yield back.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from Kentucky, Mr. Rogers, for 5 minutes. Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, I want to begin by thanking my colleague and friend from across the Big Sandy that divides Kentucky and West Virginia, and my good friend across the aisle, Nick Rahal, for organizing these special orders by the Congressional Caucus on Prescription Drug Abuse. Congress, the DEA, the medical community, state partners, and particularly the Federal Drug Administration must do more to fight the medicine cabinet epidemic. The Office of National Drug Control Policy in the White House has identified prescription drugs as our nation's fastest-growing drug problem, easily eclipsing cocaine and heroin abuse. As has been said, the National Center for Disease Control has said that prescription drug abuse is now a national epidemic. In 2010, 254 million prescriptions for opioids were filled in this country. That's enough painkillers to medicate every American adult around the clock for a month. Our military soldiers are coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan hooked on these pain pills. In the last 2 years, over 150 of our soldiers have died from overdoses. In my home state, Kentucky's losing roughly 82 people a month to prescription drug deaths, more than car crashes. Our medicine cabinets are more dangerous than our cars. But these statistics, of course, are just numbers. So many Americans, including members of our caucus, who've taken to the House floor today, have been touched by this tragedy in some personal way. In some counties in my district, half of the children are living in a home without their parents, in large part because of prescription drug abuse. I've met single moms struggling to get through drug court and employers who can't string together a clean workforce. We've lost mothers. We've lost grandfathers, police officers, children, brothers and sisters, husbands and wives. This epidemic does not distinguish between socioeconomic lines or gender lines or geographic lines. It's indiscriminate in its path of destruction, and it has to stop. FDA has to be part of saying no to the abuse of legal drugs. FDA is the primary entity for regulating prescription drugs with its hands on the spigot. For years, I've pleaded with the FDA to take a harder look at how these painkillers are allowed to be prescribed. Congressman Frank Wolf, Virginia, and I have implored FDA to make these painkillers available only for severe pain. Prescription painkillers such as OxyContin and Opana were originally intended to treat severe pain caused by cancer. But over the years, based in large part on marketing practices, many physicians, dentists, other health care providers began prescribing opioid painkillers for moderate to severe pain. A toothache or a stubbed toe has become an excuse for an oxy prescription. Now, OxyContin is a wonderful drug intended for terminally ill cancer patients, people in severe pain that needed a time-release capsule over 12 hours. It helped the patient, it helped the caregiver. But it's also a very addictive drug and very difficult to kick once addicted. So this is really a dangerous drug when not used in the prescribed way. This FDA-approved indication for moderate to severe pain can create the false assumption that opioids are a safe and effective treatment for chronic non-cancer pain. On the contrary, more than 30 leading clinicians, researchers, and health officials recently petitioned the FDA to strike the term moderate from the indication for non-cancer pain, add a maximum daily dose and a maximum duration of 90 days for continuous daily use. When we're losing 16,000 people a year to these drugs, the FDA must take this petition seriously. And, Mr. Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Johnson, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I will introduce today the Verifying Official Totals for Elections Act, also known as the VOTE Act. Electronic voting machines are vulnerable to poor design and tampering, and there is currently no way to verify the accuracy of an electronic vote count. The VOTE Act will ensure the integrity of our voting machine systems by requiring any software used in an electronic voting system for any federal election to be deposited in the National Software Reference Library. Depositing the software in the National Software Reference Library will allow the software to be available for review in the event of an election contest or recount. The VOTE Act is definitely needed. We are 97 days away from a crucial election, and according to a recent report, half the states have inadequate post-audit election procedures for electronic voting machines. It also found that a quarter of states have post-audit election procedures that need improvement. Further, the report found that in every national election in the past decade, computerized voting systems have failed. Machines did not start or failed in the middle of voting, memory cards could not read, and votes were mistallied. I'm sure that you all who are computer literate out there have had a computer and you were working on it and suddenly it froze up, and in order to unfreeze it, you had to reboot it, and in the process you lost all of your data that you were working on. Or some of you may have had the misfortune of a computer hard drive just freezing up on you and just crashing, and you had to take it somewhere and try to get the data, try to retrieve your data off of that hard drive. It cost a whole lot of money. You may have even manipulated your child's computer to prevent access to a dangerous website, or somebody may have installed, unbeknownst to you, some software on your laptop computer that you carry around so that they can keep track of your whereabouts. These are the kinds of things that we must be concerned about as far as our electronic voting machines, their accuracy and the fact that they can be manipulated. There have been several e-voting inaccuracies since 2006, including prominent controversies in South Carolina, Florida, and Pennsylvania. The VOTE Act provides peace of mind, and it does so by requiring that the source code or the blueprint of the e-voting system must be stored in the National Software Reference Library, and this will allow auditors to compare that code with the actual machine to determine if there has been any improper activity. This is an urgent problem, and the VOTE Act is the solution. The right to vote is fundamental to our democratic process and protected by the Constitution of the United States. The right to vote is protected by more constitutional amendments, the 1st, 14th, 15th, 19th, 24th, and 26th, than any other right we enjoy as Americans. Thus, it's vital to ensure the integrity of that vote. We must do everything in our power to ensure that every American who casts a vote in the upcoming election is counted. I thank Common Cause, Florida Voting, verifiedvoting.org, and the North Carolina Coalition for Verified Voting for endorsing this bill. I urge all of my colleagues to support the VOTE Act, and I invite members from both sides of the aisle, Democrats and Republicans, to co-sponsor this bill. Protecting the vote and the integrity of the voting process is not a partisan issue, but an issue that is important to all citizens and vital to the strength of America. Thank you, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Thompson, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, today I rise to recognize and remember Joe Hartle, a friend and lifelong farmer of Centre County, Pennsylvania, which is located in the Commonwealth's 5th Congressional District. Joe Hartle was a distinguished leader in both the agricultural and fair industries and a staple in the Centre County community. He sadly passed away in March of 2012. First elected at the age of 17, Joe served on the Centre County Grange Fair Committee for more than 60 years. For the past 25 years, Joe Hartle faithfully served as president of the Grange Encampment and Fair. Joe was instrumental in making the Centre County Grange Fair a showcase for agriculture with events to satisfy all ages. Through his leadership and hard work, the Grange Fair has become one of the leading fairs in the state. Held annually the week before Labor Day, the Centre County Grange Fair has become the largest encampment east of the Mississippi and highlights Pennsylvania's #1 industry, agriculture. In addition to his work, family was always a very important part of Joe Hartle's life. He was married to his wife Gladys for 56 years. They had 5 children, Linda, Jan, Tom, Deb, and Betsy, and 11 grandchildren. And I want to thank Joe for a life spent serving others and a legacy for Centre County that will live on for generations. Rest with the Lord, my friend. Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
Chair recognizes the gentlelady from Pennsylvania, Ms. Wertz, for 5 minutes.
As August begins, millions of young people across the country are preparing to head off to college. Fall brings not only a return to course selection and roommates and football games, but also to high college tuition bills. In my home state of Pennsylvania, the average cost of tuition and fees topped $12,000 for a public four-year school and $32,000 a year for a private university. These high costs force 70% of Pennsylvania college students to take out student loans. One of the biggest decisions facing students and college graduates is not just the amount they borrow, but who their lender will be, whether it will be a private lender or a federal loan. Federal loans are simply a better deal. They offer lower fixed interest rates, consumer protections, and manageable repayment options. Private student loans, on the other hand, typically have uncapped variable rates, hefty fees, and fewer consumer protections. From 2001 to 2008, the private student loan market exploded, increasing from $5 billion to $20 billion. Lenders loosened underwriting standards and often cut school financial officers out of the process. While students may need private loans, they should know the differences between private lenders and federal loans and be fully informed of the differences in cost and obligation. Unfortunately, right now, a majority of student loan borrowers who are turning to more expensive student loan programs or private options do so without fully exhausting all of the federal student loan options available to them. This means that student borrowers unnecessarily take on increased costs. That's why I've joined with my colleagues, Representative Jared Polis and Tim Bishop, to introduce the Know Before You Owe Act, to ensure that students and their families have access to vital information regarding their student loan programs. The legislation requires schools to counsel students on the financial aid options available to them and requires private lenders to adopt common sense steps to protect student borrowers. The Know Before You Owe Act will empower students and their families to make informed decisions about financing their education. Access to higher education is a top priority for middle-class families. They know that higher education is one of the keys to being able to succeed in a competitive 21st century marketplace. They're willing to invest in their future by taking out student loans in order to afford college. We need to ensure that students have full and complete information about the most affordable student loan options available to them, and to fight back against those who might take unscrupulous advantage of families facing tough financial decisions. I urge my colleagues to join with me in supporting this important legislation and better ensure that millions of Americans can afford college without taking unnecessary long-term financial hardship and risk. Thank you very much, and I yield back.
The Chair recognizes the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Keating, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I ask unanimous consent to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank Congressman Ray Hall for organizing this morning's hour on prescription drug abuse, as well as thank Chairman Rogers for his work, as well as Congressman Mary Bonomack and Steve Lynch, all members, as I am, with the Prescription Drug Abuse Caucus. Prescription drug abuse is defined now as an epidemic in this country, and the cost of this epidemic is more than $70 billion a year. This is by no means just a criminal issue, and that's where the stigma sometimes makes this issue more difficult. It is indeed a public health issue, and for this reason, Congress needs to step in. Painkillers amount for the country's fastest growing area of drug abuse, ahead of cocaine, heroin, methamphetamine. And throughout my 12-year career as a Norfolk County District Attorney in Massachusetts, the susceptibility of new users, particularly teenagers, to these drugs has been a recurring theme. I have seen as district attorney in concrete terms that this scourge goes across every social and economic boundary that exists. I have seen law enforcement officials who were involved in automobile accidents and duty take these painkillers, become addicted, and actually go out with their guns and rob, armed robbery in banks and other institutions to try and just feed their habits. I've seen real estate professionals get involved and go to open houses just to search medicine cabinet to fulfill their habit. And I have seen young people begin an addiction and abuse of prescription drugs from their family's medicine cabinet, finding that later on they cannot afford that habit and move to a cheaper, pure form of heroin. And I've seen the public health effects of this as well. I've seen the HIV disease spread to people. I've seen 14-year-old girls with hepatitis C as a result of trying to deal with this scourge that is an epidemic around our country. And in Massachusetts alone, 1.7 people every day die of an opiate derivative overdose. In 2010, the National Institute of Drug Abuse showed that 2.7% of 8th graders, 7.7% of 10th graders, and 8% of 12th graders abused Vicodin. Over 2% of 8th graders, almost 5% of 10th graders, and over 5% of 12th graders abused OxyContin for non-medical purposes at least once in the year prior to that survey. This is why I've introduced the Stop Tampering of Prescription Pills Act, or the STOP Act of 2012, with Chairman Rogers, Congresswoman Bono Mack, and my other colleagues. Currently, tamper-resistant mechanisms are in use for some drugs, but this bill is a first-of-its-kind federal legislation to put a clear pathway for others to come to market, type of drugs that will follow. The process outlined in the bill applies both to brand names and generic drugs, both to time release and to immediately release pills. Initially, we'll incentivize the use of these tamper-resistant processes. Then, in time, they'll be required. This bill is not a silver bullet by any stretch of the imagination, but it is a very important piece in preventing new users from abusing painkillers and safeguarding against overdoses. Just as seat belts and airbags in cars cannot prevent all car accidents, tamper-resistant formulations will not prevent all instances of drug abuse, but it is a necessary tool in protecting vulnerable populations like the adolescents I have spoken about. With this bill, we're also preparing for the potential onslaught of pure hydrocodone pills. These are currently being developed, and without proper physical and pharmaceutical barriers in place to prevent the tampering of these painkillers, this potential advent of pure hydrocodone will dramatically increase the already alarming rates of abuse and addiction. The bill would mandate the tamper resistance of these pills, as well as many others. These pills provide great relief for many of Americans in terms of extreme pain. But we must do something about another type of pain, a terminal pain, a pain that family members and loved ones feel when they have lost someone to the disease that results in this type of addiction. I encourage all my colleagues in the House to co-sponsor H.R. 6160 and further encourage the development of these tamper-resistant mechanisms. It's not a silver bullet, but it's an important first step. Mr. Speaker, I yield back the rest of my time.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Lynch, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank my friend and colleague, Mr. Keating, for his leadership on this issue. I rise this morning along with several others of my colleagues, Mr. Ray Hall, Mr. Keating, who you just heard, and also Chairman Rogers, to talk about the very important issue of prescription drug abuse in America. Prescription drugs are responsible for the fastest growing area of drug abuse in this country, ahead of cocaine, heroin, methamphetamines, and other drugs. In fact, according to the Center for Disease Control in Atlanta, prescription drugs cause most of the more than 26,000 fatal overdoses that we see each year. But despite this alarming number, there exists a lack of knowledge about this particular type of substance abuse that prevents many people from identifying it as the problem that it is. And that, in turn, makes it more difficult to achieve a real solution. Prescription drug abuse is an epidemic in this country, plain and simple, and it must be dealt with as such. While prescription drug medication can help people suffering from a range of chronic and temporary conditions, for many, many others, exposure to pain medication, whether prescribed or obtained through other means, can be the beginning of a long and tragic battle with addiction. Now, as you've heard from previous speakers, from Massachusetts to West Virginia to Kentucky and to California, many of my constituents also struggle with prescription drug addiction and its consequences. Those people are homemakers, they are professionals, they are students and laborers. Addiction does not discriminate. Abuse of prescription medicine, especially opioid pain relievers, is a major problem nationally. And in Massachusetts, where deaths, emergency room episodes, and admissions for treatment related to non-heroin opioids has skyrocketed in recent years. In fact, 99% of individuals entering treatment facilities who report heroin use started with a prescription medication like OxyContin. OxyContin is a narcotic painkiller which has started too many people on this terrible journey to addiction. It is a drug that by design is inherently so powerfully addictive that it actually changes the brain over long periods of treatment. And it creates customers for life. It creates addicts. OxyContin is a drug that has caused so much grief to individuals, families, and communities, caused so much pain and suffering, that earlier this year, the nation of Canada removed it from the market, and I commend them for that. I in fact filed a bill in May of 2005 to do exactly the same thing in the United States, but because of the powerful lobbying efforts of the drug companies, that legislation was not successful, and that's a big part of the problem. In the United States, we continue to put corporate profit ahead of personal loss. Reports of the abuse of OxyContin surfaced soon after its introduction in 1996, a year in which Purdue Pharma, the manufacturer of OxyContin, made $1 billion on the drug. In 2007, Purdue Pharma pled guilty to criminal charges that they intentionally misled doctors, federal regulators, and patients in regard to the addictive nature of their gold mine drug in order to boost their profits. But despite its troubled history, OxyContin is still available, and in 2011 earned $2.8 billion in profits for the company. In addressing the problem, we need to consider the range of contributing factors. We need to look at the composition of the drugs and the marketing of these addictive drugs and the regulatory approval process. There are two measures that I want to note here. One, there has been a significant effort to reformulate this drug so that it is less susceptible to abuse, and I commend the drug makers on that effort. The second issue is with Blue Cross Blue Shield, which has instituted a limiting factor. It requires a robust reevaluation of any patient who is being prescribed OxyContin over a period of time. And I think that is one of the best decisions of a drug company, an insurance company in this country in some time. So I commend my colleagues on the Congressional Prescription Drug Abuse Caucus for their legislative efforts, and I look forward to continuing to work with them on this very important issue. Mr. Speaker, I thank you for the time and your indulgence, and I yield back.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Perlmutter, for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Mr. Speaker, and to a fellow softball coach. The Columbine. Columbine is the state flower of Colorado. It's a beautiful flower found in our mountains. Whites and blues and yellows, and just a gorgeous state flower for us to have. 13 years ago, on April 20th, 1999, at Columbine High School, we had a terrible tragedy. And I want to have all of us remember the names of the kids that were killed at that shooting. Cassie Bernal, Steve Curnow, Corey DePuter, Kelly Fleming, Matt Kechter, Daniel Mauser, Daniel Rohrbaugh, Rachel Scott, Isaiah Scholes, John Tomlin, Lauren Townsend, Kyle Velasquez, and teacher Dave Sanders. Now, Columbine, just like this flower, has recovered, sprouted. It's a beautiful school, strong academics, strong sports, good citizens. We're very proud of the kids in that high school. It's near where I live. But we still have suffered some scars from Columbine in Colorado, but we've learned some lessons. We learned some lessons that were put to good use 10 days ago in Aurora, Colorado. Aurora, as many of you will remember from your mythology classes, is the goddess of the dawn. And there will be a new day. You know, we're suffering in Colorado right now. It's a beautiful state. It is a wonderful place. We've had two very difficult, tragic moments. And in this last 10 days, Mr. Speaker, I've had a chance to go to 5 funerals and visit with some people in the hospital. And I want us to remember the names of the people that were killed a week or 10 days ago. Jonathan Blunk, Alexander Jonathan A.J. Boyk, Staff Sergeant Jesse Childress, Gordon Cowden, Jessica Gowie, Petty Officer 3rd Class John Larimer, Matthew McQuinn, Michaela Medic, Veronica Mosier, Alex Sullivan, Alex Teves, and Rebecca Wingo. Beautiful people, good people, harmed in a very senseless moment in our history. But in the midst of this tragedy, there were a lot of heroes. And from Columbine, we learned lessons to get in and move quickly to save lives. So beginning with the Aurora Police Force and the firefighters from Aurora, tremendous acts of courage that saved lives, saved people from bleeding to death. We saw in our medical teams a coordination of effort, the likes of which none of us would ever want to go through again, but tremendous efforts on the part of the medical teams to save lives. And so yesterday I had a chance to meet with some of the people still in the hospital, which gave me so much hope and inspiration. I want to start with the family where the husband and the wife, she's 9 months pregnant, decide that they want to go to a movie before they have their firstborn. They want to get that one last date out. He's shot. She suffers shots from the shotgun pellets. He's down on the 1st floor having surgery on his brain. She's up on the 3rd floor of the hospital having a baby, baby Hugo, who is like the biggest kid I have ever seen at that age. He's definitely going to be a baseball player, and the Rockies came by to visit him and gave this baby 2 baseballs. But she was so positive and so optimistic about her son's future and about the future of her husband, who's had great medical care and, you know, will have long time and long-lasting injuries, but he will do well. And this wife was so positive, young woman, really optimistic about life. Another young man who was shot in the side. He was in a coma, has come out of it, and he is now planning to start his 1st year of college at Western State in Gunnison, Colorado. And finally, one guy who had been in a difficult state, the President of the United States came and visited him. He woke up at that moment. Whether it was because of that visit or not, who knows. But he has a huge smile. The Rockies came to visit him, and he said, "I'm sorry, I'm a Yankees fan." So he then, to my chagrin, he also is a fan of the San Diego Chargers and the Oakland Raiders when he should be a Broncos fan. But he's recovering well, too. These people are recovering. Our community will recover. We live in a great state. And I want to just finish with these words, if I could, Mr. Speaker. Ordinarily, I speak off the cuff, but one of the staff members in my office who's a Coloradan wanted me to say this, and I believe it. But we must remind ourselves, even after these tragedies, we must remind ourselves and the world what it is to be a Coloradan. We are the cities and the open spaces. We are the mountains and the prairie. We are the mountains and the trees, the snow and the sunshine. We are loving families and longtime friends. We are welcoming neighbors and kind strangers. We are Coloradans. We live in paradise and surround ourselves with loving, wonderful people who enrich our lives. This is what defines our state. We will always remember the victims. We will always honor the heroes, and we will grow stronger. I am proud of my state. I'm sorry for what happened, but we will grow from this. And I thank you, Mr. Speaker, for the time to speak on behalf of my community. Thank you.
Chair recognizes the gentlelady from Alabama, Ms. Sewell, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today I rise and recognize and pay tribute to a distinguished Alabama educator and civil rights pioneer, Professor Thelma McWilliams Glass. She was known for her exemplary efforts in the field of higher education and her tireless commitment to the struggle of racial inequality. Professor Thelma Glass was the last surviving member of the Women's Political Council, the organization that was instrumental in planning and the organization of the Montgomery bus boycott in the 1950s. She recently passed away in Montgomery, Alabama on Wednesday, July 25th at the age of 96. Professor Thelma Glass was born in Mobile, Alabama on May 16, 1916, and at an early age was instilled a love of learning that led to her lifelong pursuit of academic excellence. She graduated valedictorian of Dunbar High School in Mobile, Alabama at the age of 15 and earned a bachelor's degree from Alabama State University and a master's degree from Columbia University, both in geography. In 1942, Thelma McWilliams married the love of her life, Arthur Glass. They were both professors at Alabama State University for over 40 years. Their love for each other was as strong as their dedication and commitment to the students that they taught at Alabama State University. After 41 years of marriage, her husband, Professor Arthur Glass, passed away in 1983. Professor Thelma Glass was an accomplished educator who taught geography at Alabama State University for 40 years. She led by example, displaying the same exceptionalism, tenacity, and commitment to public service that she demanded of her students. After 4 decades of dedication to Alabama State University and her community activism, in 1981, the Thelma M. Glass Auditorium in Trenholm Hall was dedicated on the campus of Alabama State University in her honor. Professor Glass was at the forefront of the civil rights movement, showing great courage as she stood up to social injustices at segregated Montgomery, Alabama in the 1950s. She was a core member and secretary of the Women's Political Council that formed at Alabama State University to campaign against such abuses and the indignation of segregation. The activism of the Women's Political Council laid the groundwork for the successful Montgomery bus boycott. When Rosa Parks set the protests in motion with her arrest in 1955 after refusing to give up her seat on the bus, women like Professor Thelma Glass was ready and willing to fight against such racial injustice. The Women's Political Council was soon absorbed into the newly formed Montgomery Improvement Association with Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. at its helm. Professor Glass continued to play an integral role in copying thousands of flyers and recruiting her students to spread the word of the bus boycott. She risked her life driving in the carpools and organizing transportation for those participating in the boycott. The success of the Montgomery boycott pushed the civil rights movement into full force as African Americans across the South fought against racial inequality and ultimately led to the signing of the Voting Rights Act of 1965 by President Lyndon B. Johnson. It was women like Professor Glass who refused to sit on the sidelines and be a footnote in history that made it possible for all of us to enjoy the rights that we do today. I know I would not be standing here as the first African-American congresswoman from Alabama if not for the activists like Professor Thelma Glass. The remarkable career of Professor Thelma Glass as an educator and civil rights activist has been recognized by numerous awards. In 2011, Professor Glass received the Black and Gold Standard Award, one of the highest honors awarded to an alumni by Alabama State University. Professor Glass was an active member of Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority, the Montgomery chapter of the Links Incorporated, and St. John's AME Church. Thelma Glass was indeed an inspiration to all. I know, on a personal note, Professor Glass served as a role model and mentor to my mother, Nancy Gardner Sewell, who she encouraged as a student at Alabama State University to pledge Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority. Professor Glass was the epitome of a woman of grace and style and commitment and dedication who lifted as she climbed. I stand on the shoulders of these trailblazing activists such as Professor Glass and this remarkable woman who paved the way for the advancement of African Americans. Our nation is eternally grateful to Professor Thelma Glass, her commitment to racial equality and social justice that is a great example to all of us. She left an indelible mark on the state of Alabama and on this nation. And today I proudly stand to acknowledge her legacy and hope that we all remember it for generations to come. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from Maryland, the Democratic Whip, Mr. Hoyer.
5 minutes and revise the statement of remark.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, this week's middle-class tax cut debate is unfortunately an unnecessary sequel to December's fight over extending payroll tax cuts. Republicans campaigned on a pledge to seek bipartisan solutions to our pressing challenges. But when faced with a bipartisan agreement in December of last year, they chose to walk away. Unfortunately, they appear ready to do so again. When it comes to extending tax cuts for the middle class, Democrats and Republicans agree. Both believe we ought not to do so. So we have agreement. That agreement has been reflected in a Senate-passed bill, Mr. Speaker, as you know. So with millions faced with the uncertainty of whether their taxes will go up next year, why haven't we acted? This should be an easy vote for an overwhelming majority of members to say, let's extend these tax cuts we agree on, and then debate what we don't agree on. It should be easy. But the Republicans, Mr. Speaker, are continuing to do what they do so often have done best this Congress: obstruct, delay, and walk away. By holding an extension of the payroll tax cuts for 98% of our taxpayers hostage in December, Republicans walked away from the middle class. They walked away from their responsibility to seek compromise on job creation and economic recovery. They walked away from negotiations over deficit reduction, setting up the dangerous sequester that now looms at the end of the year. The sequester exists because Republicans pursued a policy of placing the nation's debt at risk. Today, sadly, they are walking away from the middle class and working families once more, demanding their way or nothing on tax cuts. No tax cuts for the middle class, they insist, without an additional tax break for the upper 2% of income earners. In other words, we agree on 98%. We don't agree on 2%. Rather than doing that which we agree upon for 98% of the American taxpayers, we will hold them hostage until we get agreement on the 2%. Of course, if we agree on the 2%, it will add $1 trillion over 10 years, if followed for 10 years, to our deficit and debt. Republicans' plan of tax cuts for the wealthy hasn't worked before, and it won't work now. Under President Reagan and both Presidents Bush, deficits climbed. Democrats want to return to the successful policies we had under President Clinton, when we had the most successful economy, 4 years of balanced budgets, and 4 years in which we did not increase the national debt. I say to my friends on the Republican side of the aisle, Mr. Speaker, we have had many opportunities to work together this year to address our challenges. But each time, our Republican colleagues have walked away. In doing so, they broke a central promise in their pledge to America. That is, the promise to let the majority work its will. We could have extended the payroll tax without a fight. We could have found a big and balanced solution to deficits. And we could be voting today on a tax cut extension for 100% of Americans who make up to
$200,000, or if they're a couple, $250,000. But in each case, Mr. Speaker, Republicans moved not towards the center, but to the right to place the extreme wing within their party. Placate the extreme wing within their party. Yesterday, Mr. Speaker, Representative Richard Hanna of New York, a Republican, said this about his party in Congress, and I want to quote him. This is Congressman Hanna from New York, a Republican. "I have to say that I am frustrated by how much we, I mean the Republican Party, are willing to give differential treatment to our extremists in this moment of history." The gentleman from New York went on to say, quote, "We render ourselves incapable of governing when all we do is take severe sides. If all people do is go down there and join a team, and the team is invested in winning and you have something similar to the shirts and skins, there's not a lot of value there." Congressman Hanna in this instance is right. Republicans have been unable to govern. Again and again, this Republican House has received compromise bills from the Senate, but has been incapable of agreeing to legislation or passing a version that could become law. That was true in transportation. It's true on the Farm Bill. It's true on violence against women. It's true on this tax bill. Examples include, as I've said, violence against women, the Farm Bill, postal reform, the Highway Bill, FAA reauthorization, and many others. Instead of focus on winning politically, they ought to be concerned, Mr. Speaker, about governing effectively. They can learn much from our outstanding Olympic athletes. In team sports like soccer and basketball, athletes who normally compete against each other at home have come together as one team, Team USA. They've won gold. They've been successful. We could be as well if we came together as Team USA. Those athletes may harbor rivalries most of the time. They may not be used to working together. And they all know that when the cauldron is extinguished, they'll once again wear different colors. But right now, in London, they're all wearing red, white, and blue. And they've set their differences aside to achieve victory together. We ought to follow their example. Republicans ought to follow their example. We have the chance today to be one team and make possible what we agree ought to happen. Again, we agree on 98% of the proposal. Let's agree on that and agree to debate that on which we don't agree. So I say to my Republican friends, stop walking away from the middle class and start working with us to get things done on their behalf. Now let me quote someone that I don't usually quote, Newt Gingrich. When he was Speaker of this House, when we were considering a compromise that he and President Clinton had agreed to, and so many of his Republican colleagues, Mr. Speaker, as you may remember, opposed Newt Gingrich's efforts. He said, "I would say for just a minute," I'm quoting Newt Gingrich, "if I might, to my friends who were asking for a no vote, the perfectionist caucus," as he referred to them. He concluded his remarks in urging them to vote for a compromise agreement. So the question is, can we craft a bill which is a win for the American people, because it is a win for the President and a win for the Congress? Because, he said, if we cannot find a way to have all three winning, we do not have a bill worthy of being passed. The President's indicated he will not sign the Republican bill, and the Senate won't pass the Republican bill. But again, my friends, Mr. Speaker, as you know, we have agreement on 98%. And we are hung up because we don't have agreement on the other 2%. Mr. Gingrich went on, the Speaker, "Now my fine friends who are perfectionists, each in their own world, where they are petty dictators, could write a perfect bill." And he concluded, in a free society, we have to give and take. We have to be able to work. Mr. Speaker, Americans must lament the fact that they see their representatives agreeing on 98% of a proposition and will not pass it. Will not pass it because the perfectionist caucus has promised in many respects to one individual American, we will not raise taxes, ever. We won't pay for what we buy, even if we think it's important. Mr. Speaker, both parties have an opportunity today to stand up and reflect agreement and do something positive for the American people, do something positive for the American economy, do something positive to grow jobs in America, do something that will give certainty and confidence to the overwhelming majority of Americans who will say that Congress can work. It can, as families understand they must do every day, reach compromise, come together, reason with one another, give and take, as Speaker Gingrich said. Let us hope, Mr. Speaker, that we reflect the best in us today, not the worst, not the confrontational inclination, but the inclination to come together, to make America better, to make sure that the American people who are working hard every day don't see a tax increase on January 1st as a result of a perfectionist caucus unwilling to compromise, unwilling to pass an already passed Senate bill that will give 98% of Americans confidence that they will not receive any tax increase on January 1st. What a good thing that would be for America, for the American people, for the American economy. Let's work together. America expects us to do that, and that's what we ought to do. And I yield back the balance of my time.
Pursuant to Clause 12, Parent A of Rule 1, the Chair declares the House in recess to hour 12 noon today.